Welcome to the Newcomers Podcast, where I explore what it means to be an immigrant to immigrants like myself. Today, I'm chatting with Victoria Patenaude, who's a communications coach. But I wonder if she's really a communications coach or if she's someone who helps you build confidence and find your way in the country. Because as an immigrant, it just kind of feels like, you're in a new country, new cultural context, a lot of cognitive overload, and you're struggling to find yourself, struggling to integrate. You don't have confidence in your language anymore. Victoria helps immigrants solve all of that. But let's get to her story, and there's a ton of stuff to learn here from her. Enjoy. I'm always interested in how, if you look at yourself, and you said something really interesting about whether in the pre-show about if your mom had raised you back home in Poland, who will you be?
Yeah.
And even if you just think about, let's even start with your mom. If you look at your mom and who she's been over till now, and look at yourself, are there any differences, or do you feel like you're still like you are her, or you feel like the society itself has kind of shaped you in its own way, that two of you at some point kind of just start going in different directions from an identity point of view?
Wow, Dozzy. Really profound question to start. I feel that my mom certainly struggled with her identity as an immigrant. And I think if we think of the question of immigration really holistically, I think the reason that someone immigrates, that really plays into their identity as well. Are they immigrating from a place of power? Or in the case of my mom, she was leaving a communist regime in Eastern Europe and fleeing like a lot of issues. So she always struggled with her identity as an immigrant. She certainly struggled with her communication. And whether we want that to be the case or not, of course that influences the children living in that household. Like that is just a fact. And so if we look at the research about children raised in multiple cultural environments like I was, and to add to the fun of the complexity, so I was raised in a Polish household with my mother, but I would spend every summer growing up, Dawsey, in Greece with my Greek father. So a child like me never really knows the cultural expectations, or even if you do, your brain spends so much energy being like, okay, we're in this environment, how do I behave, what do I say, is this polite, is this impolite, that we're functioning from a place of nervous system defense all the time.
Jeez.
So to answer your question, like even in my 20s, even when I had my master's and I was beginning my business, I still, like, who I was, at least who I thought I was this very, very careful person. And as I've done some deeper work over the years, I realized that's not who I am. That was a result of my upbringing, of like my very complex identity. And so, to answer your question in a roundabout way, now I'm really trying to take ownership of my own complex identity. And I certainly encourage others to do the same because it's so easy. And you talked about this recently. Maybe it was with Olia. Were you talking with her about the idea like we're labeled as an immigrant, but you're also a father, you're also a husband, you're also all these other things. So I really try to allow others to embrace this idea that even though you are an immigrant, you are a million other things as well. Our identity is complex and changing. So now I really try, like my children, a lot of immigrants are given their native language from a place even of shame. Again, whether our parents want this to be the case or not. But if you go out in public and your mother and grandmother are whispering to you, don't speak Polish, like we don't want them to know we're Polish, they'll treat us different, like if that's your experience, then of course you have all these issues that you carry with you. So with my children, they're trilingual, but we've been so wildly intentional about giving them their full power in each of their languages and an identity that's not burdened by any kind of like shame or trauma. Of course, easier said than done. And I know that was a very long answer to your question, but it was a complex question, Dawsey. So I think like I've started to peel the layers of what my mom and her issues were, but only in adulthood have I started to recognize some of these issues And now as a parent, I'm trying to pass on the good part of being multicultural and
Yeah.
not the difficult stuff.
Yeah. Sorry, I started with complex. Well, I
Well,
started
it's
with
good.
complex because you talk a lot of complex stuff on LinkedIn, honestly. But
I
you know,
try to keep it
I,
simple, but I do, Agazi. You're right.
yeah, because and I totally agree with you because I always say that once you go past the security and you're labeled immigrant, it's just one thing, and then they label everyone just immigrant. Oh, we're all immigrants, and but I'm like, in that monolith that you're all trying to label, because it's simpler for us to use that for politics and for different kind of things. There are a ton of different people who are dealing with different things. Like you said, some people immigrate from a place of power, some from a place of weakness, some from a place of
Necessity.
trauma.
Hmm.
And all those things affect how they show up, how they do things.
Yes.
And like you just raised something that I mean, I think I've thought about it, but not how you put it. And then that trauma literally is passed on to the kid, and the kid grows up with that identity and starts to struggle with, like, who am I? Like, what am I doing with myself? Because I mean, I hear you say this thing, which is the thing about, no, don't speak the language, and it might seem like as if it's nothing in the moment, but the kid grows up and is like wondering, like, okay, why did that happen? Because no one really explained to them why that happened, and even if you try to explain, it doesn't make sense to them, and then you have to deal or unpack that yourself as you grow older.
Yeah.
And that is that is something.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting. I don't remember the name of the lady I listened to on your podcast maybe a month or two ago. Um, she was, I think she was Nigerian, but I'm not sure. But I remember she was from Africa. And I've not worked with many African clients over the years because Africans tend to have so much cultural pride, tend to, of course, I'm not trying to, generalize, that also influences whether the language is passed down to the next generation or not. And even within my two ethnicities, I barely know anyone like me who moved here as a young immigrant who passed Polish on to their children. Almost nobody. But my other half is Greek, Dawsey, and I know many people who very proudly passed on Greek.
From the
So
language,
it's really fascinating to think about.
yeah. You raise a really interesting point there. That cultural pride and that holding on to it. I think there's also something someone. So I interviewed a fella called Derek Sievers. Derek Sievers, who's an entrepreneur, American, moved to New Zealand, and we're talking about how sometimes that is nostalgia in the sense that, and maybe the cultures handle it differently, but he said, for some people, the way we do things once we leave the country, we hold on to all the
Mm.
things that we knew, like we hold on onto them so really hard, because for us, that is the one thing that makes sense. Nothing else makes sense anymore. Everything is now in flux. But then when you go back home and see the people who are back home, they don't hold on to it that hard. They've moved on. They're like, oh, I get, it's a language. Oh, yeah, yeah, you can speak it. But we were like, no, I want to speak the language. And it's just all that complexity of just moving to a new place and just trying to find yourself and all that kind of stuff. But
It's so true, Dawsey. You know, it made me think of um, a lot of Polish people of my mother's generation. They speak, they call it like Ponglish, like they code switch so much that it's not Polish.
ah,
And I've really tried to pass on actual Polish to my children because obviously English is so dominant here. My husband's
yeah.
not Polish. Like if I were to speak half Polish, like they would just not know it. But it's really funny because in Poland now, there's a lot of English phrases and like expressions. And my mom will say something, and I'm like, keep it in Polish. And she's like, no, no, like in Poland, they use that word. And I'm like,
Oh.
we don't use that word. Like, we're going to pretend like it's Poland of the 80s, and that's how we will talk forever. So, absolutely. I feel you. I really do.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Curious. Now, with all the way you just explained to me about how you grew up and stuff, like if you think about, when did you start to feel like, okay, I am truly, I'm at home now. I'm at home in myself.
Mm.
I'm beginning to feel like I belong here. Like when did you start to feel that?
pretty recently.
Oh gosh, you're not making
Yeah.
me feel hopeful.
But I think the awareness plays a massive role. And I think too, I I'm kind of like a permanent immigrant, and I say that because I moved out of the home for university, and so my adult life has been split between living in Quebec, where obviously technically I'm not an immigrant, but like a little bit, right? Because there's a different language and a different culture. And then the
Yes.
other part of my adult life has been in the United States, where the language is similar, but there are, of course, massive cultural differences comparing Canada to the US. And so I feel like I'm this constant, like, observer. And only recently, honestly, probably, Dawsy, since having children, and again, like being mindful of like what I'm passing down to
Yeah.
them, I think it was quite recent trying to tease all these things apart and realizing that like we like a label doesn't mean that we have to be or act a
Mm,
certain way. Like we can
mm,
carry a lot of the same labels and behave differently
mm,
and have different thoughts, and just the idea that we like we have self-determination and we get to decide how we show up in the world despite whatever labels we may have. So recent though, not, and I'm turning 40 this year, so it's been a long journey.
yeah, it is. It is. It can be a journey, And I really thank you so much for saying that about labels, because it's especially when you're dealing with the identity crisis as an immigrant. It's so easy to adopt those labels or to kind of think
Mhm.
that that's who you are,
Yep.
But you're right. It's like you don't have to be that. Like you are. I like how someone explained to me one time. She says we have heritage, and heritage itself, we are always adding to heritage, and
Mm.
that that heritage is in entirety is what defines the identity and the language and the nuance we show up with. And so being comfortable in the heritage you have, which is your whole self, your Canadian self, your Polish self, your American self, and then accepting whatever shows up at each point in time, because you know what, you're human. Like if you think about, if you're someone who believes in the soul and all that, the soul is formless or fluid, or and so allowing all the labels, oh, you're Polish, okay, but I spent some time living in the States. What happens to that heritage I built up there? Because it was useful to me and it was
Yeah.
powerful, and it had strengths I believe in, you know. And I think that that's the thing that we for me is we've allowed the politicians for too long to define immigration in certain words that limit us,
Hmm.
that make us think there is a weakness, that allows them use it for cruel things. To be honest, I'm like, immigrants have to accept that. I think immigration is a superpower. It's hard, it's tough, but
It's hard.
that resilience you build, that fluidity you build, it's a superpower. Like you can't. I mean, I'm thinking of your kids, and I'm jealous of them. They're trilingual. Do you know what it means to be trilingual? Like your brain is literally morphed between three languages. Like that is a gift.
It's so cool. It's really neat. Yeah, but I so agree with you regarding labels, and I feel sometimes even like the outcomes of why these things happen, like sometimes I think they even have good intent behind them, but the
Yes.
result isn't positive. Like a lot of my clients, when they share with folks that they want to improve their voice patterns to match North American English standards, they're told often by all of their coworkers, well, don't Dawsy, don't do that. Like your accent is who you are. I hear this a lot. And like we're literally simplifying someone's identity, and we're saying you need to show certain linguistic features because I believe that that is how you need to show up in the world. It seems empowering, right? But that's not empowering to take away
Jeez.
someone's agency to choose what his or her goals are and how that suits them in their everyday life. Like, and for my clients, drives them crazy. Like it's disrespectful and rude, but it's framed as very empowering, and so, and part of that is like North American cultural in general, right? Like, oh, we uplift, but let's like dig a little bit deeper and see, are we actually uplifting people, or are we pushing these narratives that usually aren't helpful, or that at
Jeez.
least, so it's, yeah, nuance and context are key, I believe.
Yeah, we're gonna get to this the work you do in a bit. I want to just ask one last question before I get to the work you do, because I think the work you do is super important for immigrants. Is when you move between the States and Quebec, so you know, was it easier for you to settle into Quebec because of your experience with the States, or was it still, hard? Because if I mean, you moved when you're pretty much younger, so you probably didn't like settling in was something that happened with the help of your parent, your mom, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But it still had some experience, and you built some resilience from that. I believe kids do that. But when you now moved to Quebec, like to live your life,
Mm-hmm.
did the past experience help, or was it still like a shock again?
I I think if I were to move to Quebec today, like with this again, my eyes a little bit more opened, I think I'd be quite prepared. But I think like we think of, so let's say, immigrant, and there are certain things we may assume about an immigrant, okay? Different language, different culture, and a lot of logistical burden, right? Like the paperwork, oh, the visa extension got denied, oh, I'm trying to bring my mother over, that there's conflict in my home country. And so of course when I moved here when I was little, oblivion, right? In moving to the US, initially as a student, and then I worked there, same language, but quite different culture. And so I think I was a little bit surprised. Most Canadians, Dawsey, think that it's a very similar culture. Americans do
Oh,
not think that Canadian culture is like American. Let's not get into like the politics of what's happening today. But so I was really surprised that people thought so differently. So I experienced a culture shock, though I thought like we're neighbors. Like I've been to the US 1 million times. And so the language wasn't a shock per se, though, Dawsey, everybody commented on my accent, my Canadian accent moving to the States. That also really shocked me. I thought I spoke pretty much just like an American. And so this is a good example. Like I think when we dive into accents a little bit more, a reason that a lot of people have struggle with their accent, sometimes it's emotional related to identity, and other times it's practical. In my case, it wasn't practical. Everyone understood me, and it wasn't even an identity thing, but it was just like burdensome. Like everyone I encountered all the time initially was like, wow, are you from England? And I thought, my goodness, like never even been to England. Do I sound like I'm from England? But I sounded English to their American ears. And so just to get to the point of like, then when I moved back to Quebec, again, I had that, like there's just different struggles always. Like in Quebec, I really struggled with a lot of issues with my French. I carried like we can get into this more too, but it's like I brought a very stressed out nervous system whenever I spoke
mm,
French. And this happened for a very specific reason. And we can get into this because I think this can be beneficial to all of your listeners, that we can tend to think that how effective we are is related to our confidence in a language, but that's not true. Like we can show up with full confidence, barely speaking a language, and we can show up with little confidence, speaking almost like a native English speaker, but we can have the narrative that says, oh, you made one tiny mispronunciation. That means X, Y, and Z about you. So all that to say, moving to Quebec had its completely different issues for me, but I didn't have any like cultural issues. I think I almost felt like so separate. Like I was like, yeah, like I'm not at the time I was like, I'm not a Quebecer. Like I'm not trying to be a Quebecer per se, but the language was a burden versus when I moved to the US, the culture was more of a thing. And I was
yeah,
shocked at how different it was. So I think it depends what we're struggling with the most and where our awareness lies.
yeah. And you just said something that I want to get into what you do, and because what you said now, I find that really interesting. That thing you said about the confidence levels and your language, like, could you talk a bit more about that? Like, how does that work? Because yeah, it feels like as immigrants, like I know I've fallen into that narrative where you're saying to yourself that you need to show that you can speak the language, because then that affects how you show up at work, the work you do, that's how people say that's how good you are at what you do, because you can express yourself in the way they express themselves.
Yeah. So over the years, I've worked with folks like in Montreal. Have you spent any time in Montreal?
Yeah, I've been to. So I lived in Ottawa when I landed.
Oh, I didn't know
So
that.
so yeah. So we've come there. I've not. So I've come there a couple of times. I've gone to that. What's that park Omega that has
The deer.
the deer and the stuff. I've gone there, so I know what it looks like. But I wouldn't say I've spent time in Montreal or Gatineau or the Quebec side of
hmm
Canada.
So what's really neat about Montreal is that a lot of people that were raised there speak perfect English and perfect French. So they're literally considered perfectly bilingual. And so I think if I had done my business anywhere else, I wouldn't have had the same experience. But initially, I would have clients, like my first few clients ever, who sounded to me, Dawsey, literally like 99% like a native English speaker, saying like, I completely lack confidence in my English because like clearly I sound French. And I'm like, oh wow, like, but you're very, very close. But that wasn't enough because the standards are ridiculously high. People feel that, like, unless you're perfect, it's not good enough. And I don't know if this is still the case, but back when I was applying for jobs in Montreal, a lot of the job descriptions, literally in the description, had written perfect bilingualism required. So no pressure, no pressure at all. And I never got a job in French, but that's a story for another day. But so right away, I was noticing how are you not confident? Like for all intents of purposes, practically speaking, you're extremely effective, but you lack the confidence. And then once in a while, like most of my clients come to me directly because they want to. Once in a while, I'll get a group from an organization. And I remember still very early in my career, I was working with this group of priests from India. And out of the four of them, one was difficult to understand for me. The other three were easy to understand. And I asked them, how would you rate how confident you are in English? And he was like, extremely confident. And I was like, huh. And then, so these like very early experiences kind of primed my thinking to look for this. And now, like, I can tell you for sure, confidence is a choice that you can make right now. And there's a lot that goes into confidence because, of course, if you're trying to communicate at work and all of your coworkers are saying, Dawsey, I don't know what you're saying, please repeat yourself 100 times, of course, that will impact your confidence. But deciding to be confident or not, we don't have to reach a certain level of English or any other language. I'll share with you what happened with me in French because I think this is so interesting. So, I did French immersion in Ontario. So, starting in seventh grade, most of my classes were in French. I was certainly effective enough in French. And then I don't remember, like 12th grade, I did debating. And because I was on the debating team, I was really cool, Dawsey, as you can imagine. I I had to debate against native French speaking students who went to a French school, not a French immersion school. It's different. Anyways, I got like destroyed in every way possible, like humiliated. And you'd think like, oh, whatever, like some silly debating tournament. But my brain decided that French is dangerous. Of course, I didn't realize this at the time. Afterwards, when we were moving to Montreal from the States, I was applying to jobs that required French in my profession. I didn't get any of them, Dawsey, and I was surprised because I was like, my French, I don't think is that bad, but why did I not get the jobs? Because I had anchored the stress of that debating tournament into how I showed up in French every single interaction. And so I knew like I'd be speaking French and I was so nervous and I like was out of breath. Like I almost looked like a crazy person. I was acting so stressed, but because when something really big happens like that, you're a teenager and you're so embarrassed, your brain literally goes, oh, okay, French means you should be in a sympathetic nervous system state. And what's really crazy about it, this I carried this for years, like over 10 years, just like completely frazzled. And I was really learning a ton about the brain and neuroscience. And as my knowledge kind of integrated about how all of this works, it didn't take me 6 months or 3 weeks to make that shift. Like once my brain kind of downloaded that information that I'm just operating from this state, but like that's really in my control. Dazzy, no joke. It like I flipped it like this. And since that moment, I I have enjoyed speaking French. I've never improved my French since. I haven't taken any French course since that time. And now I enjoy speaking French. I get joy out of it. I speak it as regularly as I can in my community. So it goes to show that when we're immigrants, it can either be a collection of small experiences or a really big experience. I have had clients who were like really embarrassed by some, very rude teacher or coworker. That happens as well. But a lot of the time, it is the story that we are telling ourselves. It's, oh goodness, someone asked me to repeat myself. They must think that this means that I am not smart or whatever. But that person may not think that at all. They probably
Yeah.
don't think that. And that is an easy fix. I did a TED talk about it that should be out soon. And it's like an instant fix. It's a mindset shift. But how we think about stuff makes a really massive difference for how we show up. Massive.
Damn. Like, because it just kind of makes sense why it now starts to have affect cultural integration, sense of belonging. Just because you're you're approaching everything from a point of panic, anxiety, you're anxious, and
Yeah.
you pass on that to the person beside you, or you don't even have the confidence to be yourself. You're like, okay, like, should I be here? Do I deserve to be here? Because we've literally just matched language style, intelligence, when they're not. They're two different things. Like, the way I speak doesn't mean I'm not smart. I'm just learning how to speak. Doesn't mean I don't know what I'm saying.
And
But
Ozzy, that's also based on culture, like our native culture. In a lot of
mm,
cultures, I've had a lot of clients. So English, for example, isn't a phonetic language, right? So if you don't know how to pronounce a word, like if you haven't heard how a word is pronounced, there are many ways it could be pronounced. Like English is just like that. Many languages of the world are very clear. Like this letter means this sound. I've had
yeah,
so many clients like come across a word and I'll say, oh, like a lot of native speakers also wouldn't know how to pronounce this word. And they're like, well, of course, if you're educated and intelligent, you would know. And I'm like, actually, no, not necessarily. Like English just isn't a phonetic language, but there is also certain cultures value education and showing that we are intellectual much more than in North America. But again, if that is our belief from our native culture, then we look at everything through that lens and we think, oh, this
yeah,
person won't think I'm intelligent, where I can tell you that in general, most cultures value education more, at least differently. Again, it's more nuanced, but in North America it matters less to show how intelligent you are. Like I would say that showing somebody that you are good at connecting with them is more important than showing like how smart Dawsey is and how educated you are. People don't value that as much.
hmm. Yeah. I think yeah. There's that. I think also there's also a fine line where, for certain people, so certain kinds of people, they have to kind of work harder to kind of cross those lines, because it just kind of feels like there are different walls that you have to kind of jump every single time,
Mhm.
and then if you're unlucky enough, meet people who are just rude and who just kind of remind you of all those things, and then all those things now build experiences that affect how you show up. So
Mhm.
you're like, oh, I need to show that I'm smart. I need to show that I can work hard. I need to show
Yeah.
that I have to prove that I belong here,
Yeah.
and so you're just kind of dealing with all those things, and then in the end it slows you down, because I feel like approaching life from that point of view is it just slows you down. But it's a real thing that you have to kind of deal with and walk through,
Mhm.
you know.
Certainly.
And yeah, and I think just kind of build on that. So how does someone now build the confidence to do you have any idea how someone can build the confidence to step past all those both invisible and visible barriers that exist? Like, because I feel like it's a mental thing. Like, it's just saying to yourself, you know what? Like, I know that this does exist. I know that some people will be racist. I know some people will be biased. I know some people will have certain perspectives that sometimes is out of ignorance. But
Hmm.
how do I jump past that myself and just believe in myself? Because I feel like it's the work is in here. Because we often externalize and say it's their fault in a way. I mean, I'm not saying that those people are not at fault at some way, but I feel like a lot of the work we have to do is in here first, and then every other thing kind of starts to kind of work out in some way.
I think you hit the nail on the head earlier when you were saying that all these experiences, they're going to change how we show up the next time. And so, like, it seems so frou-frou to talk about mindset, but it really does start there, because if if we have this belief that everyone is looking at us a certain way, there is no way that we can show up ready to go in our best self form, right? So our mindset is really important, and the acknowledgement of the fact that as immigrants, we almost necessarily carry a higher cognitive load than somebody down the road who was born and raised here, only speaking English, with their culture and the home being established, right? We are processing language differently, possibly. If we are an immigrant, there's definitely a cultural component. And there may be all these other logistical components as well. Cognitive load, when it gets too high, when our brain is just processing so much, it forces our brain to function from a state of defense. And so when we are in that state of defense, we look at everything as a potential threat, right? And but just having this awareness and knowledge that, okay, I've just moved here. I am dealing with so much. I'm going to naturally have this protective filter on because my brain, like you said earlier, is almost in a state of survival. How can I adjust my expectations? A lot of immigrants are very ambitious. I was speaking to an immigrant recently. His goals for this year, Dazzy, were like insane, like crazy. And I'm thinking, those are beautiful goals, but like each of those goals would take up like your entire brain, okay? And then add to that, again, language, culture, and all these other things related to immigration. So it's to realize that you have to be very clear with what your goals and values are. Acknowledge that those may change over time, and don't make everything your burning priority right now. If you, the way you're communicating right now, is serving you in your life, you don't also have to have as one of your goals to improve how you communicate. Like, maybe that will never be one of your goals because you can function just fine. Like, again, there tends to be this narrative among immigrants, oh, I need to work on XYZ. I've literally, Dazzy, no joke, so many of my clients are like, and I guess I need to improve my vocabulary. And I'm thinking, you don't. Like, your vocabulary is absolutely stellar. You work in a really good position. You know what I mean? So we like add these goals to ourselves sometimes, and immigrants do this a lot, to be like, I guess, and it's probably speaking to what you were talking about. I guess I need to prove my worth even more. I guess I need to develop this even more. Acknowledge that you probably don't need to develop yourself in every way. You need to be very clear on what you're working towards, but the reason for that is to reduce your cognitive load. And when we have these goals that we're not actually pursuing because we have too much on our plate, then we deal with the guilt of not working towards our goal. Then we like add to our cognitive load, ironically, by trying to do all the things. So I think, to answer your question, how do we get more confident, is to be compassionate to ourselves and to be like, whoa, I am dealing with a lot. What loops can I entirely close? Even though I want to do X, I want to learn how to sew. Like, is that going to fill up my cup? Like, is that actually allowing me to be a more balanced person? Is that bringing joy into my life? Or is learning how to sew, I don't know why I came up with that example, is that actually like really burdensome? Like, it's actually stressing me out. And being so specific in what we take on, but not trying to take on everything, and especially not trying to take on these narratives that are not even our own. Like, oh, Dazzy, like, you should learn how to do this. Why? Like, is that actually valuable for you, or is someone saying that that's valuable for you? So just to own our own identity, own our own goals, and only pursue the things that matter to us right now without any guilt attached. That if I have a lot of clients as well, for example, who call their family in their country of origin like every single day. because they feel like that's the only way we'll be connected. Talk about cognitive load, Dawsey. That's a huge ask of someone. So to even say, I may love my family very much, but it's too much for me to take on calling them 7 days a week. I will do 4 days a week and I'm still a good daughter or son or what have you, you know? So to it really starts again, it sounds so woo woo, but it's not. Like, to start with self compassion, to love and accept the complex person that you are, and then act in alignment with where you want to get to. But don't get lost in different narratives, and don't get lost with biting off more than you can chew, because it won't be productive.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things you mentioned there is that part about self-compassion and just kind of understanding the complexity you're dealing with,
Yes.
and also just not allowing those narratives happen, because I feel like once you're compassionate to yourself, then you understand that you're going to meet some people who are rude and who are, who will what's the word, I forget, it's left my head, but just kind of look at you through a certain filter, but through certain biases and all, and that's who they are.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also people who will take you for who you are and
Yes.
love you for what you are. And
Yes.
I always say that there's this movie I watched as a kid. I think I walked into it as a kid, but I just never forgot that part of the movie where the lady was telling a young boy. It was a movie about war and all the horrors of war. And the lady told the young boy that the world always have good people and bad people.
Mm-hmm.
What you must not do is allow the bad people make you see the world how they see the world, like, and say the world is now just full of horrible people. I feel like a ton of the things narratives we carry now is that everything is bad or everything is horrible. There are a ton of many horrible people, and then it kind of goes back what you said about you now start to project that onto other people and stuff, and nothing. So you're always on self-defense. You're always in a protective mode because you're already in a protective mode because you're trying to settle in a new culture. There are too many new things to learn. So you're literally naturally going to self-defense and survival. Just kind of sitting back to say, okay, are these really is this really a problem right now? Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I can't really speak English properly. Okay, like what's the best thing I can do with what I have with myself right now?
Mm-hmm.
Can I find spaces where I feel like myself so that I can slowly calm down my nervous system and start to live my full life? I mean, again, it's easier said than done, but I totally agree with you that the ton of things that I feel like we just buy them. Like, we literally buy them for free. Like, how you buy a narrative and just hold on to it and be like, oh, and start to define your reality that way.
And we don't even know we've done it a lot of the time. But to your point, like, it's exactly what you said. Even in our, even in our culture of origin, there are people who are our people, that we're going to click with,
Yes.
and there are
Yes.
tons of people who are rude and who we would never connect with. So I think it's also to be really careful, and again, not assign intent. I have so many examples that I could give when I did assign intent to someone. Oh, they did this because I speak this way because of this. And then I found out, like, oh, that wasn't accurate at all. That was my own insecurity being projected. But it's the same thing. And to also acknowledge that because there are these differences culturally, and as we're figuring them out, sometimes, like, we may make a mistake, like, for a long time in Quebec, I'd address everyone like in the formal form, like vous, right? And then, like, someone made fun of me, like, oh, like, you're too formal with people. And so now I throw like two out to everyone, like the informal. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, did I mess up? Did I offend someone? But we can't go through life, Dawsey, worrying that we offended someone if we did not mean to be offensive, right? One of my clients recently, who's really working on cross-cultural connections specifically, and she said, what if I ask somebody how they did on an exam? She said specifically, she's like, and what if they did really badly? And so, like, I have just offended them. And I was like, goodness, well, we wouldn't ever take the risk to connect with anyone if, you know what I mean? We have to assume people are reasonable people, and we have to, it's kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall. I met a girl last week, and we just clicked. And if you were to see me, I was bubbly, I was enthusiastic. Like, I opened my whole heart to her, and like the questions I asked her, how I showed up, completely okay with the idea that, like, she might have been like, I don't want to be
It's
your
too much.
friend. You're aggressive, you know? And Ozzy, afterwards, we found out we have a very close common friend. I didn't know that initially though. I texted her, like she gave me her phone number. This was like a week ago. She hasn't texted me back. The old me would have been like, I did come on too strong. I was too aggressive of a new friend. Now I'm like, the girl's busy just like everybody else. Like, I'm not going to create some extensive narrative as to why she didn't text me back because, like, it's fine. Like, you know what I mean? To not personalize
Yeah,
everything either. But I say, like, throw spaghetti at a wall. Connection, even if two people are going to have the like the most amazing connection and end up being best friends, it depends on when you catch the person, right? What if something crazy is happening in that person's life and you like finally build up the courage and they're like, hey, so and so, like, do you want to connect? And the person's like, not really, or they brush you off, and then you're like, they must hate Nigerians, right? And maybe you guys actually will become very close, but that person is dealing with some massive issue right now and they can't connect with anybody. But then to your point of earlier, if we then say, "Oh, everyone like this person doesn't like anyone like me," well then we're never ever going to try to build that connection. So
yeah,
we have to put ourselves out there, and for me, like the more awareness I have and the more I'm just okay with who I am, the rejection doesn't hurt. It really doesn't. You know, it's like we can be friends, we cannot be friends. That doesn't change my value as a human
yeah,
being at all, truly.
yeah. You know, it reminds me of what Derek Silva said to me. He said, "What you must never do as an immigrant is to paint a country with a brush because of what someone did to you.
Yes, such good
You must,
advice.
you must never do that. You must like if someone did something to you, and it's that person. It's not everybody.
Hmm.
And you just got me thinking about stuff like we moved to a new country and I think we're out of our safe space. And so we go into this we'll talk a bit about it's very protective self defense mode. And everything, we start to react to everything. But what you're saying is what you're really doing for people is, teaching people how to cross culturally connect. Because I think as an immigrant, especially one who lives in North America, Canada specifically,
Mm,
you have to learn cross cultural connection because you're meeting different kinds of people from different cultures and or a melange of cultures, like the people who have been their dual identities,
exactly.
their tri identities,
Yeah.
and they're now in Canada and they're trying to also find their way like you. And so just coming at everybody with oh, they did this and this is probably is either my fault or we're out of fence. It's like just be yourself.
Yeah. Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. Like and then to make the best of it. Like some people you all will jam, some people you all won't jam, and that's life. And just life just goes on.
Exactly. But you will find your people. Like if
Yeah,
you're people can like sniff out authenticity from a mile away.
yeah.
Truly. Recently, I got a really beautiful compliment from someone that I quite admire. She said, "You're really charismatic." And this made me laugh because I certainly don't think of myself that way. And I was like reflecting on that. And I thought, the only reason that I think she feels that is because at this point, again, coming into my 40s, I'm not trying to impress you with what I'm saying. I'm not angling like, oh, Dawsey wants me to say this. Think about if we do that for everyone we interact with. That is
Yeah.
exhausting, right? And I think she said that because, like, we can sense if someone is just showing up. Like you said earlier, how when we're very nervous, like we pass on that nervous system state. I think the same thing is true. Like for our whole conversation, even before we were recording, we are both in a state of connection. Like I can feel it and I'm sure you can feel it.
Yeah.
But if we have like these narratives, or if I'm like, I need Dawsey to think this of me, I can't say this, I should say this, we're too much, again, in a sympathetic
Yeah.
state to be in connection. And so, again, as immigrants, we have to be very mindful. And Dawsey, what's really cool too, so many of the clients I've worked with are from Quebec. But what's really cool, and I wish I was a researcher to be doing research on this, but I don't think that's in my future. I work with many folks who are not immigrants, who are born and raised French speaking Quebecers. And so they don't have the cultural piece, right? Like they're already settled in their culture. They don't have oh, this conflict is happening in my country of origin. I have to, do all these things. I can tell you that these clients tend to just look at it so much more objectively. Like, this is just a linguistic thing. This isn't some big identity thing. Like,
Oh
there are some
gosh.
exceptions, there are some more nuance, but generally speaking, and they're able to make moves more easily because they don't have all this other emotional baggage
Stuff.
attached to their goals. So it's really cool to also be able to see that that we can say, if I'm looking through it through the lens of like a non-native English speaker, it really depends on, again, what else is going on. That in and of itself doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good piece of data you just shared, because it means the emotional baggage we carry, because whether we like it or not, it's there. It plays a role in how
Mhm.
we shop, plays a role in how we see the world. It just kind of just affects us in ways that we don't know. And like it feels like the big work we need to do as immigrants is just kind of stepping back and saying, what am I reacting to, and what's true and what is not true about what I'm reacting to, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. It's 100% it. Yeah, we have so much more control than we realize.
Yeah.
And so many of the labels that we carry either arose from a certain chapter of our life and we've carried it forward, or were assigned to us by society or by a certain individual. And it's really worth examining. Am I really shy? Like, I grew up feeling like extremely shy was a label that I just carried. Again, literally into my 20s. Now I would not consider myself shy at all. But if you had asked me 20 years ago, I would have been like, that's just my temperament. That's who I am, Dazzy. So
Gosh.
questioning everything about ourselves. Like, why do I think I'm shy?
Hmm.
These are the behaviors I'm attributing to this label, but what else could these behaviors mean? Where did this come from? It's cool stuff to unpack for sure.
Yeah, it reminds me of something I read somewhere where someone said, most times we spend so much time trying to understand the emotion that we don't give it the space to pass on the message it's trying to pass on, because every emotion is a
Mm.
message reacting to something. But we spend so much time trying to rationalize, justify that if you just let the emotion just be and just go through you and give yourself time, you start to understand why you feel that way. And sometimes there are things that you haven't unpacked, or things you're feeling deep down inside, or things that happened, or biases that you carry that are defining how you're reacting to that thing.
It's a beautiful
Yeah.
example. Yeah, our emotions are trying to serve a purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's what they are. We're rounding up now. I think the last question I have for you is, what are the tips you have for immigrants who are just trying to, adjust to the new communication nuances of their new home? Like, what do you think, like, what are your top three, five, two, one tip for, like, basically just kind of finding yourself
Hmm.
if you don't speak this native language, or you're learning native language, or you speak it but you think like, oh, I don't speak it well enough. Like, so how do you adjust and learn and get better at all that?
Hmm. I think, again, for me, it all comes down to thinking first. Like, as a human, we first show up through the state that we're in. And so being very mindful that, let's say we have like a really abstract big goal. A lot of my clients say, I want to sound like a native English speaker. There are so many, like, there are so many nuances and steps to achieving that. If that's your goal that you tell yourself, for example, our brain tends to go, that's really obscure. I don't know how to measure that. I'm going to go into a state of anxiety slash shutdown because I can't even navigate that. So I guess my first very tactical strategy would be to be very specific with yourself when you have a goal related to your communication, so that you can clearly know that you've achieved it and that you can know the steps to take to achieve it. Saying, I want to improve my vocabulary. Like, again, do you really need to? Maybe, maybe not.
Mhm.
But let's assume that you do. Then make yourself a very specific goal, break it down in a way that you can experience the success along the way. And then when you meet that goal, your brain can actually release all the hormones associated with meeting a goal. And you can be like, bam, I met this goal. I learned 100 business vocabulary words. And then to again be very objective to assess, like, is this good? Like, is my vocabulary working for me now?
Yeah.
Or do I need to keep progressing? But if we create these very abstract and giant goals, which a lot of my clients do, then we are always in a state of feeling like we're failing because we're not measuring it, and then we feel guilt for not making progress. And another thing too, there's this phenomenon, like our brain wants to feel that we're really aligned in our identity. So again, we said a lot of immigrants are quite what's the word I'm looking for, Dawsey? Motivated. Okay, so if you're like a very motivated person, and let's say you're an expert in your field, and that's a part of your identity, and then you have this other piece that's, I have this really obscure goal that I'm not meeting, there's this dissonance that's created, and your brain is having to reconcile, like, wait, I'm an expert, but I'm failing at something like just English. And so again, we can try to rectify that by trying to make the English goal very specific, very achievable. Um, and another really interesting thing, also, like back to the beginning of our conversation, growing up in multiple cultures, for me, how that uncertainty can lock you into a state of sympathetic nervous system activation. It's the same thing when we're navigating a new culture. The feedback that we're receiving is often not what we expected, because a
Mhm.
lot of cultural differences aren't things that were even that are on our radar at all. If they were on our radar, I'd be like, oh, okay, like, but like when my mom moved to Canada, in Poland, you don't smile at strangers on the street. Like, nobody does that. And so when people were smiling at my mother on the street, her brain wasn't saying, oh, well, these people are friendly. She was like, these people are crazy. you know, Obviously, if she knew that was a cultural difference, she'd say, these people aren't crazy. This is a cultural difference. So to constantly be aware of the fact that, like, we tend to auto respond. So before jumping to a conclusion, to kind of embrace the idea that there are going to be a lot of things that our brain is making a conclusion for us that is incorrect. So to pause
Yes.
and to think, okay, I'm feeling that this person is like really bizarre, smiling at me. I don't even know this person. And then it's like, well, maybe here that means something different. And to understand that, but to also understand this really big picture, that uncertainty and getting feedback that we weren't expecting is extremely stressful to our nervous system. So the coolest thing too, Dazzy, I feel like everything I've said is the coolest thing. But I've seen this so many times. You would think again that for someone, say, to feel confident in English, they would
Mhm.
need to master certain skills. And this is what's so neat. I've had a lot of clients over the years. I'd be like, okay, this is the topic. This is how you practice it. And then the following week, I'm like, did you practice it? And they're like, no, but I'm so confident now. And at first I was like, huh? But it's because we've taken away the uncertainty. So even if you like
Okay.
suddenly haven't mastered intonation, if you understand that the person waving to you is just possibly being friendly, if you understand that intonation functions differently, you don't have to do it perfectly, but suddenly you're not receiving this feedback that's constantly saying, you're getting this weird feedback. I don't know why. Like, I'm in such an unsafe environment. So even just learning about American English or North American culture, even without making any change to your behaviors, having that awareness is so powerful. I'm actually thinking of writing a book about like the top things that I share with my clients that they're like, whoa, I didn't know that. And when I share this with folks, and I'm happy, like I have a working document. It's really bare bones for now, but I'm happy to share with anyone who
Please,
contacts
I
me.
wanna I wanna see it, please.
Yeah, you're so welcome to. But it's so cool because again, you'd think, oh, I need to take a deep dive. This is going to be a year of work to get me to feel confident. And I'm like, when I first started sharing my methodology really high level, very consistently do I get the feedback of like, oh, like this isn't so stressful anymore without any change to whatever you want to call it, pronunciation, accent, voice patterns. Like some people want and need that, but a lot of people, they're just navigating with so much uncertainty that their brain is like
Yeah.
crying out. And just by understanding, like a lot of my clients, I'll give you an example. They'll say like, oh, North American voice, that they'll say North Americans are so enthusiastic. And so they attribute like North American voice patterns only to a personality difference. But when you understand that like North American voice patterns also just convey meaning that's inherent in North American English, then you can go, oh, like I, this isn't a personality thing. Like this is just how the language is set up. It like relieves this burden of unknown anxiety. So yeah, I think like, the older you get, and again, when you're younger, you're like, impact? What do you mean? But the older you get, you're like, we can have such big impact by just sharing these ideas that change people's minds, and that like these
Yeah.
paradigm shifts are so valuable to understand like how our brain works, how English is taxing our brain. And so I guess again, a really roundabout answer to your question, Dazzy, but to understand that our behaviors, our thoughts, they are a reflection of our nervous system state, and we are in control of many pieces of how much we overwhelm our brain. And even if someone doesn't want to work on their English at all, if there's another part in your life where you feel quite stressed, if you could even lower your cognitive load in that part of your life, that will actually help your English because it could allow you to change your state. So, yeah.
No, like, that thing you say about reducing uncertainty is everything, honestly.
Yes.
It's everything.
And can I add something, Dawsey? I know I'm
Sure, 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 yeah, sure.
like you were saying earlier, like, oh, like let's say we move here and we feel like we don't communicate well. I also invite people to think about like, let's say we travel somewhere for vacation and we know like 50 words of the language, but it's usually enough to form a connection with the people there. And we, because of our state, oh, I'm on vacation, this is fun, I'm learning,
Oh
I'm
God,
getting
that's
to
so
know
good.
people. We're not there being like, oh, I'm doing so awful, right? Like, so it's very contextual as well. So to also realize that like everything is contextual, and
Yeah,
that in a different setting with your same level of English, you might feel great. So again, part of it is just the decision that you're making that suddenly it's not great. Obviously, if practically you can't communicate, that's a different issue. But with the folks that I work with, that's rarely the issue. It's really a lot of it comes down to these deeper issues.
yeah. That, because yeah, you're right. Like you go on vacation and you always just go like, oh yeah, I'm having fun. It's all cool.
Yeah, I'm
And then
speaking, everyone says like, yeah, I speak a bit of Spanish for when I go like on vacation, but they love their Spanish. They're not telling themselves this narrative of like, my Spanish really wasn't good enough to communicate. Like, I always also tend to ask the question when talking about like accents and stuff, is is how you speak doing the job that you need it to do? Like our communication is just a tool, right? So in that context, if you're on vacation and you want to connect with locals by speaking their native language, is it doing the job that you needed to do? Yes, right? And so, the question, I get it often, is an accent good or bad, or should I whatever? Like, I don't know. You tell me. Is it working for you, or is it not working for you?
yeah,
And again, it could be practical or it could be emotional, because even if somebody practically speaks very well but it's emotionally burdening them, well then it's still affecting you, but it's
hmm,
worth teasing that apart as well.
hmm. This is such a, I feel like this is such a really massive topic.
I know, Dawsey.
Uh,
I feel like we've
yeah,
touched on like 20 topics.
yeah, it's such a massive topic because as you pull it apart for me, you start to see that a ton of the work is also internal. A ton of the work is we're carrying emotional burdens by ourselves. Like doesn't mean that there aren't assholes out there, but it's just like it feels a ton of the work is if you start to do the work with yourself, a lot of things start to seem not as horrible as they seemed earlier on because you're not burdening yourself with stuff, all the noise and all the narratives and all the stuff that's going on around you.
Mm-hmm. And so often our narratives are wrong,
Yeah.
so often they're wrong. So I'll give you a fun example, and then I know we're done. Like I tend to have how I dress. Like I wear a lot of dresses, like a bit more of a conservative vibe. And recently, when we moved to this town that we live in now, when I would speak French, everyone would say, "Oh, like where are you from? Where are you from?" So again, like I was pretty okay with that comment, but I'd say like, "Oh, it's because of my French. It's because of my French." And then something funny happened, Dozzy. I hadn't said a word in French at all. I don't think I had said anything. And this lady came up to me. I don't remember the exact context because it was about a year ago, but before having heard me speak at all, she knew I wasn't from there. And again, it was this eye-opening moment because my narrative was, I'm getting this comment because of my French. And then I was like, maybe I'm getting this comment because like I dress a little bit differently. And that's, if you're from somewhere, that's enough to say like, folks around here don't tend to dress like you're dressing. And maybe I could have been from here, but it's just like a funny example of, again, it's triggering my narrative, it's triggering my narrative. Like my French is causing them to say this to me. But when that lady said that something about where are you from without having heard my French, I was like, oh, like maybe the comments were about my French and maybe they were not about my French. But why make a negative conclusion? Like it's better to make a
Yeah.
positive conclusion,
Yeah. Yeah. Like, gosh, there's a lot of internal work to be done.
But I think even just knowing that there's work to be done, like I feel like a lot of us growing up, even when we have professional degrees, we don't really realize that there is work to be done.
Yeah, it's become a thing now. I mean, I
Yes.
feel like, yeah, we've probably overextended it a bit as humans, as we always do with every single thing. But but it's become a thing now, like in the sense that there's just a ton of trauma we're carrying, there's a ton of narratives that we're carrying, there's a ton of stuff that we shouldn't be dragging around with us. And then it affects how we communicate, how we build relationships, how we integrate as immigrants, how belonging. It just affects everything. It affects how we raise our kids.
Yes.
And I guess it's just having conversations one at a time, and over time we'll probably find all these answers and share them with more people. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jazzy. So much fun to talk to you. I feel like we could have
Same,
chatted
yeah.
for 2 more hours.
Oh, we could. I feel like we could go on and on and on. But thank you so much. This has been really good for me, honestly, because I've
Same.
learned a ton for myself too.
But you know what's so cool, Dazzy? Like again, we have entirely different stories in terms of details, but because we're both humans, like not even because we're both immigrants, I feel we could have had a really deep conversation too if I had been raised in Poland and you had been raised in Nigeria and
Yes,
we were
yes.
connecting, and like if you are open to connect with someone and if you're seeking points of connection, you will certainly
Fine.
find
Yes.
them, so I think that's a cool thing to note as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I feel like sometimes we just come at relationships or conversations with, we're not open. We think we're
Yeah.
open, we're not open, and then we wonder why the other party didn't connect. Yeah, because you're walled off, and
Yes.
people feel that, even if
Yeah.
they don't know that they feel that. But
Yeah.
when you meet people that are just like, hey, how's it going? How's everything?
It is 100% true. 100%
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Awesome, Dozy. Well, thank you so much again, and it's
Yeah.
a beautiful day.
Like, that was good. Like, that was really, really good for many reasons, because I really like the idea of, while language is a thing, you don't have to speak the language perfectly to be confident in yourself. You don't have to. Why would you do that to yourself in the first place? But yeah, as always, thank you so much. Thank you for getting to this point of the podcast. Like, as always, like, share, subscribe on Substack, YouTube, anywhere you get a podcast, you find us there. If you know someone we should talk to, send them my way. Send them, please send them. If you know someone who finds it useful, who needs to build confidence in themselves, send this to them. Thank you.